meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you're going to hear from men and women who've experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers or foster parents, or other people who are here to bring you hope and encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share with a friend. Remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Well, Trent, you have experienced sexual abuse, neglect, and domestic violence as a very young child, and in fact were taken into foster care and not adopted until the age of 9. You had quite a time in care, and we're going to talk about that. And yet you say now how thankful you are for your journey because it has made you who you are today and allows you to help others, which is only God can do that, right? Only God can change that perspective. And I just want you to know it's a privilege to have you on the show today. So I want to start by helping our listeners understand your experiences as a child. So what are some of your earliest memories of childhood?
Yeah, so honestly, my earliest memories of childhood were filled with, like you said, domestic violence, extreme neglect, and sexual abuse. I remember most of my childhood just living in constant fear of not knowing if I was going to be fed, if I was going to be hurt, where I was going to end up that night. So just all that uncertainty and fear and just constant worry of just loss and being hurt. So my earliest years were not very pleasant and full of trauma and pain and just
fear.
Yes.
Wow. Do you remember when you were taken into foster care? How old were you?
Yeah, I was taken into the foster care system at the age of 4.
Okay. Do you remember the circumstances that surround that day?
Yes, actually I do. So I remember we were dropped off at daycare like regular, and then my along with the social worker, my maternal grandparents came and took us home with them. And so at the time I didn't know that was a foster placement, so that was a kinship placement, so I wasn't aware of that. I just thought I was going to go, stay with my grandparents, so they kind of had a smooth transition with that. So
Yeah, and for our listeners, often in foster care when a child needs to be placed, they will call grandparents or relatives first because they want kids to go to someone they know. Do you remember, was that time were you taken directly from school, did you say?
So I think it was after school, and we were at a daycare until,
right.
The work day was up and we could be picked up.
Okay.
So.
And then you were just picked up by grandma. Wow. And were you told, do you remember being explained, like what's happening, anything like that?
Not really. I was young, so they probably didn't think I would understand exactly what was going on. So they kind of didn't tell me much at all, other than I was going to go stay with my biological grandparents for a little bit. So,
yeah, that makes sense. How many siblings do you have?
I have, oh goodness, let's see, I think 6 or so.
Okay. And at that time, was all 6?
So at the time, I was separated from all siblings except for my older brother and my younger brother.
And what was that like for you?
It was definitely, I don't know, it was hard because I didn't quite understand, where my siblings had gone. But so it was just a weird feeling, just again, that uncertainty and not knowing what's going to happen next.
At this point, did some of that fear and trauma and pain subside a little bit because it had been so hard and so bad before?
I would like to say yes, but unfortunately no, because my older brother was my perpetrator, the one who abused me. And so remaining with him for so many homes, the sexual abuse unfortunately did not end once removed.
And how long till people even recognized that was happening?
It was, let's see, it was the second to last placement. So I was with him for over 3 placements. So he was removed the placement before my adoptive placement. Because I guess social workers had finally figured out what was going on. I think someone had come forward and said something, and they realized it just was not a good fit.
Wow. What do you remember about your feelings while this abuse was taking place? Like, how does that make a child feel?
Completely helpless. I mean, as a young child going on, honestly, I didn't even know what was going on, to be honest. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was happening, because as a young child, you have absolutely no idea,
Right.
So in a way, it almost becomes just normalized in a way, because if you're not told otherwise, you wouldn't think it's anything, wrong or
Yeah.
anything like that. But definitely complete helplessness, fear, and just, again, adding into that uncertainty of what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point is so many people who've grown up in a healthy home, like they have these building blocks and they have these norms that you just take for granted. You take for granted that when you cry, your parents are going to come help you. And you take for granted like that you're going to eat around a table as a family. Like those things just seem like what everyone does. But for you, your norm was abuse, was neglect. And like you said, there was no one to, it wasn't like it never existed and then it started, right? It kind of was always for you. Man. I know that something that you're passionate about is helping bring light to some misconceptions of kids in foster care. And I just want you to speak to some of the common ones you see.
Definitely. So some common misconceptions I have heard is that, we're not going to be successful academically because we've moved so many times, that, we're damaged, that the trauma may be too much, that we can't really be successful. Some other misconceptions are that, every child wants to remain with siblings, or every child who wants to have contact with their biological parents. While that is true for some, a lot of children don't want that, especially in my case, because if I had remained with my older brother, the abuse would not have stopped. And knowing what my biological parents had done, I desired absolutely no contact with them, because they knew about the abuse, they knew what was going on, and they allowed it to continue. They tried to cover it up, they tried to normalize it, they just willingly let it happen. So, yeah, but again, for some, they might want that, but for others, they may not. It's very individualized.
Yeah.
And touching back on, the academics, a lot of children do have academic holes. They do have, because they've moved so many times from school to school, and it's very difficult. I was one of those children, but with the proper supports and encouragement, I was able to not only catch back up, but excel. I was able to start college a little bit early in my junior and senior year in high school. I mean, you just can't count these children out because they've been in foster care. With the proper love and support of a family and the ultimate healing that is found in Jesus Christ, every child can be successful. Every child can, overcome trauma and thrive and be happy and live healthy lives.
Amen to that. That's so true. And it's so easy for people to make generalizations, for all of us, right? To make generalizations. And that's just not, we can't do that. Everybody's an individual. And like you said, God the Father, I mean, he works massive miracles every day in all of our lives. And wow, that's wonderful. And speaking of some of that healing and those, overcoming odds, kind of what you're talking about, you have experienced healing from the sexual abuse, from the trauma. How? Can talk about how that has happened, because what an encouragement to us as parents and to us as Christians, like to know that healing is possible. So talk to us about some of the ways that or how your healing journey has happened.
Yeah, so it took a long time, honestly. It, I feel like it really started once I was adopted. After a while, once the trust started to get there and the attachment was there.
And hold on, I'll pause you for one moment because I don't think we said this, but you were adopted at age 9, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah. So once I had that trust and attachment with my adoptive parents at around age 9, that's when I started to be able to slowly open up. So what I did initially was drop little memories, here and there, just say little things that had happened to me just to test the waters and see how they would react, because I had never told anybody this before. I didn't know if I could trust them. I didn't know how they would react. So I would just drop small little things here and there, and the way they responded was so empathetic and so compassionate, and they just so judgment free. And that's what allowed me to continue opening up and continue sharing, and through many years of, talking and working through my trauma and my parents, always pointing me back to God and the healing that is found in Him. That's really how I was able to heal, that, and the fact that my parents understood trauma and how trauma changes the brain and how it can also affect one's behavior, so that's really how I was able to do it. And also, from a young age, I wanted to fight it. I wanted to move past it, and that's another thing so many people may not understand, that if your child is not ready to work through their trauma, it's just not going to happen. You have to do it when they're ready. You can't ever force it.
Yeah. Wow. So I heard so many good things in there. Let's see if I can recap some of them. One was you tested the waters. Like you said some things, and had your parents diminished that or said, come on, that couldn't have happened, or you're exaggerating, what would that have done to you?
It would have shut me off completely. I wouldn't have continued opening up. I would have just kept it bottled back up inside, because it would have been one more adult that I couldn't trust, one more adult that didn't believe me, because for so long, no one, you feel like no matter what you say, no one's going to hear what you have to say because you're just a kid, so when you finally have someone who's willing to hear what you have to say and, will empathize with you and not cast judgment, it's life-changing.
That's amazing. So one thing I heard is they were very understanding. They were a safe place for you to speak. So they allowed you to speak. They listened, they believed you, and they loved you. They walked with you. You also said they were trauma informed. And so they understood that sometimes your behaviors or the things you were thinking or talking about maybe was like they saw beyond that, right? The negative, is that true? I guess I'm just assuming when you say this, but they saw beyond the outward behaviors and saw into your heart. And then another thing you said that's so key is they pointed you to Jesus. And it's been a long process.
Yes, very long. Yeah, and honestly, I feel like with healing, it's not one of those things that you can just wake up one day and just say, I'm fully healed. The pain, unfortunately, never goes away. It's always going to hurt. It's just a matter of how much it hurts and how much power you let it have.
Speak more to that, how much power you let it have.
Yeah, well, keeping it bottled inside, not talking about it, and just not letting, it off your chest, it still allows those who hurt you to have control over you, even though they don't realize it. Because all over time, that's going to start affecting how you live your life. It's going to start affecting your happiness, your relationships, So if you don't talk about it and you don't share it with somebody, it's going to take a toll on you, and it's really going to affect your quality of life.
Which is so counterintuitive, right? Because probably the last thing you want to do in a lot of ways is talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the last thing you want to do is talk about it, but it is also the most rewarding thing you can possibly do for yourself. And if you want to be successful, you got to move past your trauma. You got to talk about it, because our brains are not meant to handle that kind of trauma, that kind of pain. It's just not meant to we're not designed to handle that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it will take its toll.
And what are some ways do you think, and have you seen, or maybe what you know from trauma yourself, what ways does it take its toll if you don't talk about it?
Well, one big thing is that, for those who have complex developmental trauma like that and who don't talk about it, don't ever get help, around the mid-20s, it could manifest into mental illness such as anxiety, or in some severe cases, some other more significant disorders as well, depression or whatever. It can also just, you know, it can cause trust issues, which then can make friendships hard, can make relationships hard. It can make attaching to your parents more difficult. It can lead to sabotaging behaviors, some self-destructive behaviors that no one wants to face. It can make learning difficult. It really affects so many different aspects. And it can also affect your physical health, because there's a thing called ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, where if you have enough, so it's basically a list of different traumas, and the more you have, the more likely you are to experience some physical problems, physical illnesses, that there's a correlation there. But, but talking about it, working through it, can help avoid a lifetime of suffering and pain.
And I just think it is such a mind shift, and you have to believe it in your mind. I think about Daniel in the Bible, and God said he purposed in his heart before, what he was going to do, that he was going to do what didn't feel good. And a simple example, I think of just myself this morning. I had purposed in my heart to go to the gym. And when I woke up, I didn't feel like going to the gym, but I had purposed in my heart. And I remember telling myself, what the end result that you want is not, you have to do the thing that feels bad right now to get the end result you want. And it's the same thing here, on just a much more dramatic level of how life-changing it can be when you step into, I feel like I've heard it that you can't heal from trauma unless you just walk right through it. You can't, is that accurate?
Yeah, you have to go through the pain in order to find the happiness on the other side. You gotta face it. To be honest, it was the most painful experience of my life, having to go through that. But it's also the most rewarding, because it's going to go one of two ways. You can overcome it and thrive, or you can let it take you. And I decided that I wasn't going to let it take me, and that I was going to push past and live the life that God had so graciously given me.
What would you say healing looks like? Like you mentioned a little bit, like the hurt is still there. When you think about it, the hurt is still there. It doesn't overtake you. But is there any other descriptors that you could say, like what life looks like now on the other side?
Yeah. So, in terms of my sexual abuse, I'm able to talk about it openly and not feel guilt or shame. I no longer feel like that's something I carry. I've come to a point where I realize that was something done to me, and that I don't need to be ashamed of it. I don't need to, hide it. So, for me, that's a big part, is being able to openly talk about it, and,
Totally.
not have that burden of, fear or, pain.
Yeah. Like it was I think that shame piece is huge. You don't wear the shame, which I think is so sad about trauma and abuse, is that the victims often are the ones who carry the shame, even though they were victims.
Definitely, and especially as a young child, because you don't understand.
Right.
You don't understand what was, why it was wrong, or what happened. And some, I know for me, there were some irrational thoughts floating in my head, like, I should have done something. I should have known better. But when you're a child, you don't know better. And especially when there are adults inflicting such pain and such trauma and abuse upon you, there's absolutely nothing you could do. There's nothing that you could have done to stop it, and honestly, no one expects you to have known better, because you're a child, and you're raised to trust the adults around you.
Right.
And for adults to take that trust and use it and betray you in the worst ways possible it's terrible.
It is terrible. What would you say has been the role of I mean, I guess you've spoken to this a little bit, but maybe just a little bit more expanding on encouraging other parents who have kids who've gone through trauma. Just some of the things, maybe even more practically, what did your parents do as you shared with them? What did it look like? What were those conversations like? Did they have you go into therapy? You know, did they bring in other people? Like, what are some of those things?
Yeah, so definitely biggest thing a parent can do when they have a child from trauma is seek wraparound supports and community and seek out other people who understand and are going through the same thing, because without those supports and without people to wrap around you, it's going to be very difficult. It's very easy to feel isolated. It's very easy to burn out a whole lot faster. But when you've got people who are there to support you and understand and are willing to help, it makes the process a lot easier. You know, and what my parents did for me is they traveled my healing journey alongside me. You know, they felt the pain with me. They allowed me to cry. They allowed me to feel everything, and they validated every feeling I had. And they always told me that, you know, nothing that happened to me was my fault, and that no matter what I said or did, they would never love me any less. They would never judge me. You know, they just walked that healing journey by my side. They always made me feel loved and important and cherished and like I belonged.
That's beautiful. And what does that feel like? Talk about the difference between that compared to the growing up with feelings of fear and, you know, not knowing what's going on. Like, what does that feel? A feeling of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's what I had desired my entire life. You know, for the first 8 years of my life, all I wanted to feel was like I belonged, you know, and once I finally did, it was, you know, at first a little scary because I wasn't sure if I could quite trust it, you know, so, but once I realized that I could trust it, it was life-changing. You know, I was able to stop living in so much fear. I was able to stop, you know, worrying as much, you know, and again, that took a long time and it wasn't easy, but once I got there, it was incredible. And I honestly, you can't even compare the two. It's life-changing.
I love it. Okay. Pause for a second. All right. So I want to ask you this. So, okay, I'm pausing, I'm restarting. So Trent, I think it's easy to question, why would a loving God allow someone like you to endure so much pain? Like, how have you reconciled that? Because I'm sure that is a question on a lot of people's hearts. And we hear that question with, how could a loving God allow people to go to hell? You know, how have you reconciled this deep pain you've experienced with God's deep love for you?
It definitely, you know, it's not been easy. There have been times where I've questioned, you know, why me? Why did this happen to me? But then I think back to this dog tag I was given when I was in foster care, and it had Jeremiah 29:11 engraved on the front. And reading that verse brought me a lot of hope and some sort of comfort knowing that God had a plan for my life. And, you know, also during my healing journey, that's when I realized that my pain had a purpose. I realized that I could use my past experiences to help others. And, you know, I agree, you know, a lot of people, including myself, are like, you know, our God is so loving. Why would he allow us to endure so much pain? You know, and I think it's because, you know, he can use it to glorify his kingdom, and he can use it to help others, you know. And what the devil, one of my favorite sayings is like, what the devil meant for evil, God can use for good. And I believe that for just about anybody, and myself included, that, you know, and I also think that going through so much pain drew me even closer to Christ and grew my faith in him, because going through all that uncertainty and fear, God was the only person in my life that was consistent and that I could trust, and that never left me and never forsaken me. And so I found peace and comfort in knowing that, and knowing that I could always lean on him when times were tough, you know. And again, it wasn't easy. I questioned it, you know, and sometimes I still question, you know, every once in a while. It's like, you know, why did I have to go through all that? You know, but then I think, you know, why not me? Why not, because I can use that to help others. I can use that to connect with people who have gone through the same thing and connect on a level that so many other people can't.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. How have you been connecting with people? What are you doing now?
Yeah. So a big way I can connect with people is through my support ministry called Watch Me Rise. I co-founded it with my adoptive mom, and what we do is we provide supports. We provide support groups for both foster and adoptive parents and their children. We have resources, we have specialized trainings, we have books, and I public speak. We have a podcast. We, just so many different wraparound supports that we wish we had when going through the process that we try to give to our families. And, I have the ability to talk and mentor some children. I also, I'm on advocacy teams. So just trying to help in any way God has called me to.
Wow. So your entire life really is dedicated to helping others now. Wow. I can only imagine, Trent, the people that you're going to meet in heaven who are going to come up to you and say thank you. It's worth it. It's so worth it. And I am so grateful that you are willing to use what Satan meant for evil and saying, no, I'm not going to go there, but allow God to use it for good. That's so powerful. And I'm so grateful. As we close out, I want to just pretend that your mom and dad are sitting next to you right now. And I just want you to speak to them. What do they mean to you? What would you want to say to them?
Of course. Honestly, there's so much I would say to them, because they changed my life in more ways than I ever thought imaginable. Honestly, growing up thinking that, you're unlovable, that no one's ever going to want you, that you're never going to find a family, and then to find out that the opposite is true, that you are worthy of love, that you're not alone, that there are people that care for you. That was the pivoting point in my life, knowing that I had people who were going to love me no matter what. They mean the absolute world to me, and I say this all the time, that they are my mom and dad in every sense of the word. It's just the love they have for me and the love I have for them is indescribable. It's just, I could never thank them enough for what they've done for me. They gave me a second chance at life. They took a chance on a kid, who grew up in the trailer parks, experienced all kinds of horrific pain, but they saw past that. They saw the potential in me, and they saw me as their son from day one.
That's beautiful. Trent, I have so enjoyed our time together. I know that our listeners are going to be better for it. I know I am. And I just want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. And it's honestly a true pleasure any chance I get to glorify God by sharing, his story. Because, this isn't my story. This is his story that he's allowed me to be a part of.
That's awesome. And honestly, Trent, you keep that perspective, and it's unlimited what God's going to do through you. Well, I hope today's episode was an encouragement to you wherever you are on this foster care journey. Now, we want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, we have a ton of great content for you over at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you next time.